So we're going to turn to you with the microphones in just a moment. But I'd like to actually turn to the panel for brief comments on a reversal that is taking place, the stay by the Supreme Court on our carbon policies. Do you have comments on that? How is it being received in Beijing? Broader reflections from Noelle. And John, if you want to add to your remarks as well.
Great. Yeah, I can just start off by saying that in the negotiations leading up to the U.S.-China agreement, one of the greatest concerns in Beijing was actually, can the U.S. politically implement what they've signed up to do? And this is the first sign, and I think strong ammunition for those in Beijing who say the pledge was potentially disingenuous. I think it was not, certainly on the part of the negotiators. It was a huge milestone and a major advance over what had been accomplished previously and between the two nations. But at this point, I think this gives real pause to the Chinese assessment in particular.
So I think from a global perspective, you're really looking at one of the cornerstones of this system where you have this pledge system is trust. And the trust that came around to actually build this system was not negligible. And what this does is starts to erode that trust in other countries being able to fulfill their commitments as a prerequisite for you fulfilling yours. And that's really the only thing we can really build the international system on, particularly for environmental agreements. I think what it says to me is that we ought to be thinking much more locally in terms of climate policy, that we're not going to be looking at one solution. We're going to be looking at 190 solutions, and it's going to really matter particular stakeholders in particular countries and particular interests. I mean, we're looking at one or two members of the Supreme Court types of stakeholders in the United States, but the United States isn't everything. This is going to happen in other countries, and we're really going to need sort of an all-hands effort. Thinking as a next step, and this is something that could come up in the discussion, about other ways to motivate climate action and interests that you can bring on board might be a potential way forward.
So I already commented a little bit, but let me add, I agree completely with the local accumulating to more global action. This is, of course, consistent with Lynn Ostrom's principles for how to manage a common pool resource, and I think we're already seeing a lot of that, and it's a good reason to be optimistic. Meanwhile, the stay is procedural, but it certainly does not bode well for the Clean Power Plan. And it's already undermining trust, and many of the other nations have already said, look, if the U.S. isn't going to follow through on its INDC, why the hell should we? So this is already happening now, even before there's a decision. And even if the plan is ultimately upheld, it will have created uncertainty and delay. Now, let's be clear, this is absolutely a political issue where vested interests are using the system. I think you could potentially make a principled argument about executive overreach, but the number of amicus briefs that have been filed in opposition to the Clean Power Plan by the fossil industry, those people are not filing these briefs because they're concerned with the fine points of our constitutional system. They are defending their vested interests at the expense of everybody else. It's absolutely political, as you saw in the 5-4 vote. But even more important, however that decision ultimately goes, the United States is not going to be able to meet its INDC in a world of $1.70 a gallon gasoline and $30 oil and depressed prices for natural gas and coal. We already see people buying bigger and less efficient cars. We already see wind, solar, and other renewables being suppressed by the low natural gas prices. We already see people saying, why the heck should I put better windows or insulation in my house when my gas bill just fell by half compared to 2 years ago? So the headwind, the rocks in the pack, and the mountain. We've got to focus on taking away the subsidies, undermining the vested interests, and pricing carbon. And now is the perfect time to do it when energy prices are so low. Let's get that carbon price.
Driving back from New Jersey, Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, $2.29 a gallon. And I have to tell you, my thinking was this is the time to put a $1 a gallon gas tax on, at least to kick things off in the direction of encouraging conservation. But it's not going to happen.
Well, so never
Yet.
say that, right?
No, it's not
'Cause
going to
if-
happen until
Okay,
John
that's a little better.
mobilizes support.
Well, so you know what happens when 1,000 MIT students and faculty, and I didn't make
Yeah.
this up, I learned it from my students, march in Washington, and our leader says, "What do we want?" You know what we all say? "What do we want? We want evidence-based policy." When do we want it? After peer review. That's not going to do it, folks. Now, I'm in favor of science and evidence-based policy and peer review, but that's not going to do it.